Strap in and prepare for our longest episode of Talk Academy to date. This is Talk Academy. Hello and welcome to Talk Academy, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and what I said in the beginning is true. This is actually the longest Talk Academy episode I've ever recorded. It's so long, in fact, that we're splitting it into two parts. So this week you get in the first half of it, and then not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday, you will get the second part of it. It ended up being a almost 2.5 hour long conversation, just a very long episode, but it was a very good episode. There was a lot going on in there. We talked about a lot of great things. My guest for this episode is Thomas Derr. He is another podcaster that focuses on focusing on history and the role that technology plays in history, which perfectly coincides with our theme of the past few episodes, which has been entirely unintentional, but kind of has worked out in our favor in exploring the history and revolutions of agriculture. And so we talk a lot about how technological advancements in agriculture have actually made a huge difference in technological advancements in society. So it's a really good episode. We talk about a lot of different things, as you can imagine, in 2.5 hours. But this is the first half of this. This will be about an hour and 15 minutes. We'll see. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoy it. Make sure you go check out Thomas's channel. I'll link all the stuff down in the description below so you guys can go check him out. But thank you so much, Thomas, for doing such a great episode. Before you hop in, if you have the time and think about it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, do all the things. Make sure, as we always say, you share just not with your online friends and family, but with your offline ones too, around the dinner table. Talk about some of the things you learned in this episode. And if you're interested in helping out the podcast, the Patreon link will be down in the description below. You're more than welcome to donate, but it is by no means mandatory. So I just appreciate any and all support that I get from you guys. But that's it. So this episode is a little bit late just because I was having some internet issues on the day it was supposed to come out, and so I wasn't able to get it out in time. So it is a little late, and I apologize for that, but it is out now, and that's all that's important. So thank you all so much, and let's get into the episode.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Derr. I am a high school social studies teacher, previous historian, who focuses on technology and culture. I just thought the podcast seemed really interesting talking about agriculture. I've studied a lot of like agricultural technologies and like kind of how they contributed to societal development and things along those lines. Also, I'm kind of have like a little secret weapon talking about some AI and like how AI is being used in agriculture today to try and actually improve the welfare of livestock and make it not such a miserable process of like slaughter and living and kind of like all that kind of crazy moral stuff.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think just jumping straight into it, the first question that I want to ask just before we get into any of this is, what, if any, background or knowledge of agriculture do you have?
So I'd probably say like I'm fairly knowledgeable about the agriculture system in the United States, mostly on its problems, to be quite honest with you, because that's typically what historians like to study is the patterns and anything that leads to some type of issue. So talking about like, for example, like the greenhouse gases and the negative effects of the emissions from like cow farts and all that kind of stuff, being actually one of the major contributors as opposed to like fossil fuels and things like that. It's strange because when you grow up, everyone's like, yeah, fossil fuels suck. Don't use them. And then it's just like, did you know that like farmland takes up like, I don't know, what is it? Like, it's like 40% of like the whole world land that we use. It's like crazy. It's like unbelievable how much agriculture is actually a part of our lives and we don't see it. Because I live in New Jersey. I live right by the city. So it's like literally bricks and stone and glass and metal everywhere, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I'm excited to hear your perspective on some of this stuff as being a historian that does not necessarily come from an agricultural area, but has experience in it. I think that'll be really interesting to hear what your thoughts are on some of this. And I'm also a sucker for the agricultural issues. As you mentioned, it's kind of hard to avoid them if you start to do a little bit of research. And so that's kind of my bread and butter. So I think it's going to be really fun to get into some of that stuff. But on the topic of agricultural technology specifically, we'll get into all like the climate change and stuff because that is a big part of this conversation. What would you say is is there an area of agricultural technology that you're most interested in, that you want to know more about, that you've done some research in, or kind of what's your standing with it right now?
Honestly, I just find it fascinating that we've been able to go from a system of having like literally building families on farms to work together and work this land to sometimes a singular farmer doing multiple different jobs because of the types of technology that are actually incorporated into doing it, I guess like the corn chucking machine, and like just like there's a machine literally, I feel like, for almost anything: milking cows, collecting eggs, watering things, planting seeds, digging holes. It's just fascinating how much technology is actually thrown into this field, as opposed, even around like they farmers probably have more technology than I do, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's
it's
that's
true.
where I stand.
Yeah. No, it's kind of, I believe it said that the typical like chain of command is that the military gets the most advanced technology first, and then it goes to agriculture, and then it goes to the general public after that. And so, or there might be another step in between there, like maybe like the automotive industry and then general public. But yeah, so like Ag's had drones longer than almost anybody in the general public has, and we've had robots
Mhm.
and artificially intelligent, machinery and precision technology, and which, like I said, the military usually gets that stuff first, but the farmers are the next in line. So, like you said, most of the technology used on most farming operations is more advanced than what most people have in their houses, and a lot of people don't even really realize that we use that kind of that level of complex technology on our operations day to day. All right. So what before I start hopping into the heavy tech stuff, you mentioned that you're a historian. What area of history is your favorite?
Um, so like I choose to focus on like social culture. I just think it's so interesting seeing how people respond to things and also create social norms and understandings. And then even if they're not morally correct, or like, sometimes they're just the average or the normal at the time or in this community or in this society or within this religion. So I kind of like studying stuff like that. But when it comes to like eras, I think the 20th century is kind of like my favorite. I don't know, bro. It has like the world wars, the biggest technological leaps like in all of human history. There's just so much that happens in the past 100 years. um there's just so much. I love it all the philosophy, all of the enlightenment, all the thinking, the scholarship, the science. There's just a lot. Maybe it'll change in the next 100 years. Maybe I'll be like, oh shit, maybe the 21st century is actually pretty cool. But so far, it's kind of bad. I don't like it. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm a big fan of the 20th century as well. There's a lot of really great history in there, and like you mentioned, it's just so much packed into one century, and it's very like the exponential rise of
Mhm.
evolution of not just like social norms, but of technology and of cultural norms and of just like the change in society just in the past 100 years is just so drastic. It's kind of amazing to watch from a historical perspective, because you can watch a society over 1,000 years not change even a little bit, and in 100 years we've gone through several social revolutions.
It's funny. It's funny you say that because this morning I woke up. So my schedule for this year, like everything's set in stone. We go back next week to teach, and I get a call from my vice principal, and she's like, "Hey, we had the only other history teacher that could teach dual, like, so we have dual enroll. You know what dual enrollment classes are
Yeah.
with the college credits? Yeah. So you have to have a master's degree in your subject to be able to award those credits. There was only one other history teacher out of like the 10 or 15 we have, that was eligible to do it, and he resigned.
Oh.
So they called me and they're like, "Hey, you're the one that could do this. Do you want to do it?" I was like, "Yeah, of course I do. It's US 3." And I'm like, so I teach world history, US 1, US 2, and then I have an elective called Latin American Studies, which I based off of one of my graduate courses. But with this US 3, I'm like, all right, well, I need the curriculum. I need to see like what do I teach? Like, so I went to go see them today, and she was telling me, I don't really know. I need to look. I'm like, well, we looked it up and we looked at our list, and it's from World War II on. So I was like, it's so funny because it's like I spent the whole year doing US 2 from like the Civil War to World War II. And it's like that class is like, it's only like less than 100 years of history. It's literally actually 100 years of history. And then US 3 is the same, where it's like, we're going to just start with like Korea. Then we're going to go right into Vietnam, civil rights movement. And it's just like the closer you get to 2023, the more like information within that year. So it's like you could talk about like 200 CE to 400 CE, and it's almost like, yeah, there was like three emperors or something like that. The Chang dynasty didn't go away or whatever. It's the Hans taking over. But in America, like here now, it's like every day you can probably write a 100-page paper on, and it's almost like there's too much scholarship. And now with technology, everyone having access to like podcasts and all this kind of stuff, there's just so much information for people to dig through. So like the archival stuff for like going into the future and people looking back at us, they're gonna be screwed because there's just gonna be so much stuff for them to dig through, and it's gonna be so cool. It's gonna be so cool. But it was just funny because that just happened today and it made me think like, bro, we've come so far. It's actually insane.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think about that a lot too, just because so my last episode that I recorded for this podcast, and in addition to this podcast, I also do a YouTube series. I'm trying out some gaming content and seeing if I can combine gaming and educational content at the moment. And so I'm doing a Minecraft series at the moment where I'm exploring not just agricultural science, but I'm exploring the evolution of agriculture through societies using Minecraft as a medium. In doing the research for that series and for my last episode, which was all about the history of agriculture, I mean, we've had agriculture around for the past 12,000 years. And so just to give you a little bit of context, there are three historically recognized agricultural revolutions, right? You have the Neolithic Revolution, which was the first agricultural revolution. That's the invention of agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the second revolution of agriculture, which occurred simultaneously with the Industrial Revolution. So already there you have a like several thousand-year gap in between when those two events happened. But just between the second revolution and third revolution, so the second revolution was Industrial Revolution. The third revolution was in the 1960s. That's like a little over 100 years. And then it hasn't even been historically recognized yet, but I've been kind of theorizing that we're in the middle of two separate but parallel revolutions, the fourth and fifth, as I call them. And those two revolutions started just within the past 10 to 20 years. And that's still only like at most 40 years since the last revolution. And so it's like you see like the escalation of just agriculture itself, like the escalation of practices and technology. It went from, we went 10,000 years before anything cool happened to we went 100 years before anything cool happened to now we're going 40 years before something cool happens. And now it's like every day something cool is happening. It's like you said, it's like as you get closer to today's date throughout history, the amount of things that you have to record and the amount of things that you have to be aware of is just like so compacted. It's like, I don't blame anybody for not being aware of every little thing that's going on. It's like, it's impossible.
Yeah, it's definitely hard today. But I am curious, what would you say are like the triggers of like the third and your fourth and fifth parallel ones? I'm curious.
Yeah, so the third revolution, I'm not sure what your familiarity is with the agricultural revolutions, but the third revolution is also known as the Green Revolution. That was Norman Borlaug's kind of rise to fame. That was the introduction of chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
That's what I was thinking. Chemicals. That's what I was. So far, the first, second, and now the third. Those are exactly what I thought. But now the fourth and fifth, I don't. I could guess. I'm gonna say maybe like AI. But other than that, I don't even think I have an answer for you. I'm curious.
Yeah. So you're on the right track with AI. So the fourth and fifth revolutions, which again, I am 100% speculating this. This has not been recognized by any official like historical entity, but I'm saying this, and I have heard other people who observe agricultural history say this before. I am saying that the fourth revolution of agriculture is the automated revolution. So brings in AI, robotic technology, like driverless tractors, all the precision technology. Is the more advanced technological age of agriculture. So we're not just using tractors, we're using self-driving tractors with a GPS on them. We're not just using we have drones, but now we have drones that can detect, from 100 feet up in the air where the pests are most heavily populated in a crop field. Like the advancement in technology has been so exponential that I can't help but call that a revolution, just because in the 1960s where this, it's also called the scientific revolution, this massive increase of synthetic materials was now being able to be used, and genetic modification was starting to become a relevant, practice in the industry. We found all these ways to improve our yields using biology and using chemistry. Now we're finding a way to do it with not just mechanization but automation. Extremely advanced technology that is like unprecedented in any other era of agriculture. So I, with my limited knowledge of how historical revolutions work, consider that a revolution in and of itself. The fifth one is a little bit harder to argue for because it's technically existed throughout all of agriculture, except I feel like now it's a lot more heavily prioritized than it used to be. And that's what I call the regenerative revolution, also known as the sustainable revolution. So we went, the earliest the earliest, as far as I can tell, the earliest soil scientists were back in ancient Greece. I actually just wrote a lesson plan for a lesson I'm teaching tomorrow about this exact topic. I forgot the guy's name. I'm gonna have to look at my lesson plan again. But this old Greek philosopher, he was the first person to ever write about how important soil was to not just crop health, but to society in and of itself. Because if you don't take care of your soil, you don't take care of anything. Your soil is the foundation of all things productive. And over the course of agricultural revolutions, we've kind of forgotten that. We got to a point where we were, abusing the soil. We were
Yeah,
leaching it
literally
dry. Yeah,
draining it of
exactly.
all its nutrients and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we were pouring so many synthetic fertilizers in there and synthetic pesticides in there that it was destroying microbiomes to the point where they couldn't rebuild. Um, and so now, and this is within the past, like the regenerative movement kind of started in like the 80s, but it really is within the past 20 years that it's really taken any kind of wind. And this is now I call it the regenerative movement just because it's regenerative agriculture is kind of the more popular term, but sustainable agriculture, the idea that agriculture needs to have a healthy relationship with the environment is somewhat of it's not a new idea. It's somewhat of a more prioritized practice now than it ever has been.
Kind of has to.
Yeah, exactly.
At
And
this
so
point.
again, while I don't know what the criteria is for it to be considered a revolution, to see the escalation and how we handled those two things and the fact that they both happened in the past 20, 30 years, to me seems like they're two simultaneous revolutions, but they're separate. They do coexist and they do cross over from time to time. You can use technology to benefit sustainable means, but they were not caused. I'm not gonna say they weren't caused by the same things. I don't know, but they don't seem to be correlated. They seem to be entirely separate events that just so happen to coincide.
I would agree. I think that's actually important because like I was telling you before we started this, I've been watching actually a lot of like just out of pure consequence, like just because not even because like we were gonna do this podcast, I was just kind of interested in watching. I was watching stuff on food, and then it led me to like agriculture. I'm like, oh shit, I want to like figure out what this is. Um, but like the what you hear on like some of these documentaries and what they're talking about in terms of like agriculture and yields and like people like historians are like actually predicting like a food shortage in the next couple of years, in the next like decade or 20 years. And I'm like, hold on, this is like I call it like slight wind of this. And I'm like, hold on. Like that's actually serious. Like people are gonna like fight for like look what happened during COVID. People were gonna kill each other over like hand sanitizer, right? Wait until food actually disappears from the shelves in the grocery stores and then actually see what happens in our society. Watch society actually break down. So I'm kind of like putting those two things in my head, like, okay, that probably makes sense because, for literally the past maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years, people have been neglecting the importance of maintaining healthy soil. And then now the soil is literally just glorified dirt. And that's kind of like what happened in the Dust Bowl, right? During the migration in like the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, right? Where like all the soil in the South just like literally turns to dust from the drought.
Yeah.
And we don't, and you take that for granted. And then look how many people like literally dispersed all over the United States and had no home, no life. They lost their house, they lost their family, they lost everything.
Yep.
So that shit can happen, man.
It can. And like you said, the predictions that you're talking about in which there might be major food shortages that's a concern that agriculture is very much aware of. Like we talked a little bit before the episode started. When I was in high school, I was very actively involved in public speaking teams, and one of the most common statistics that got thrown around in every single speech that not only I gave but every other speaker gave was that by the year 2050 we're expected to have upwards of 10 billion people. And in order to feed that many people, we were going to have to increase our food production by about 70%. And we were going to be losing land every single year and having more regulations and having more difficulties in growing that food as that time goes on. So within the past, and at this time, it was 2016, 2017, when I was giving these speeches, it was a lot more critical. It seemed like a lot more critical now, but I feel like we're at a point now where it's like, hey, we're 27 years away from that, and we're getting better, but I'm not sure we're getting better fast enough. And I got into debates with people at times where they were saying, we had major arguments about whether or not it was relevant to increase the use of technology like genetic modification, precision technology, artificially intelligent technology, regenerative practices. Like all those things were very contentious topics, and they still are. But I think they've kind of calmed down a little bit in terms of people's perception towards them. But when I used to have those conversations, a lot of the time it was, I would say, well, we need those practices because we need to produce a lot of food, and we are not going to be able to unless we can increase our yield because we're not getting our land back. We've already ruined a lot of land, and a lot of that is now built upon. And if you build foundation upon soil, it can take a minimum of 500 years to be able to be farmed again, and we don't have that kind of time. And so we have to use everything we have, whether it be technology, genetic modification, new practices, like whatever we can get our hands on, as long as we can prove that it is safe, we should be doing it. And so I got a lot of pushback from that. And they were saying, well, we produce more food than we know what to do with now. There's so much food
That's
wasted.
exactly,
You
that's
know?
what I was gonna say. It's like, dude, it is, that's like actually like, dude, one of my pet peeves ever. It's like littering and wasting food.
Yes.
I hate when people waste food. It breaks my heart. And obviously everyone's like, what are you gonna do? Go fly it over to Africa? It's like, honestly, if I really could, I really would. But
Yeah.
Obviously I know it's unrealistic. I'm not gonna worry about starvation somewhere else when we have so much food here. That's what I hate though. It's like, what if we like reduce these resources and help to bring more food resources elsewhere and like evenly distribute it? Because bro, I go into the grocery store and there's just things rotting on the shelves. It's just like, at that point, like, just give it to the homeless. Like, dude, restaurants won't even give like food to the homeless, like, because I guess like they can be liable if they have an allergy or that's some bullshit. They should just sign a waiver, be like, listen, I'm homeless, I'm starving, I'm gonna eat this if I die, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just so sad that we have this overproduction, and it's because of technology and all the industrial and agricultural revolutions we've had and are still having. But like you said, I think it's now the argument people have to start paying attention to kind of like all the negatives that they've caused because of the new technologies and fertilizers and X, Y, and Z and the unsustainable practices that they've been doing because it's easy, makes a lot of food and makes a lot of money. Well, agriculture, you can actually argue farmers actually have harder lives because like a lot of their profit comes from oh my God, why is the word slipping my head? It's the S word. Like Oh, I can't. Oh, it's gonna kill me. It's gonna bother me so bad.
Like not stipends, but the I know yeah, it's subsidies.
Subsidies. There we go. I couldn't think of the word. I'm so embarrassed. But yeah, a lot of government subsidies is essentially like how farmers get paid. Like they get paid mostly from the government as opposed to from like from selling their crops they're selling their crops to the government, but the government fixed prices so that there actually wants to be farmers. It's like, dude, less than 1% of the world population like works in agriculture, which is like unbelievable. And it uses more than 40% of the land that we live on. It's just kind of crazy. It's just like what less than 1% of people work on 40% or more of the land that grows all the food for everyone around the world.
Yep. And to your point, like, we're producing plenty of food right now, but the problem is that food, first of all, doesn't get properly distributed. So like you said, we produce, we take about 40% of the land to produce that food. About 40% of that food gets wasted. And so it's not even, and I've heard the arguments before. It's like, well, why don't we ship that food to Africa? It's like, we would love to. The problem is we can't. There are a lot of trade reasons that's why we cannot do that. We've actually tried. In previous years, the United States government has actually tried to ship our excess food to a lot of those third world countries. But the problem is we grow our food in a very particular way, and it's usually using genetic modification,
and it's like illegal in those countries.
Yes. Exactly.
Dude, yeah, international law. I took a class and we studied like international law and like the history of it and like how it affect like the internet and like stuff like that. And it was just like, I'm like, bro, like it's so insane. Like
yeah.
Oh my God.
To your point, I mean, I'm not saying that we are definitely great at not wasting food, but we could be wasting a lot less of it if it wasn't for international law getting in our way of distributing that food. Because there have been efforts. There's been tons of incentives to try to get that.
I'm glad that there were. I'll be quite honest, I didn't even know.
Yeah. And I had to look that up because I had that same argument of like, why don't we just send it all to those other countries? And I had to look up why that wasn't happening. And yeah, it's because we tried and they said no.
I remember were you teaching during COVID?
I wasn't teaching yet. I was still in college at that point.
Okay. My first year was like after COVID and we went all back in the building and everything. And we were handing out bagged lunches. Like all the lunch was like packed and like, and it was so sad. My, one of my coworkers, me and her, like, she's like my work mom, I call her. And she like invites me like out to her like house and her and her husband, their bow and stuff all summer. They're great. And then, but like in school, she says like such a heart of gold. We were like handing out lunch because we were always on lunch duty together. And there was just so much leftover food. And I'm just like, some kids just wanted extra food or like, and we actually work in a very underserved district. So, I'm like, why don't we like donate this to like the homeless shelter? Why don't we like do something local with this food? And they're like, you can't, you have to throw it away. If the kids did not claim it, we have to throw it out. I'm like, who makes these rules?
No, yeah, it's
Like,
stupid.
like COVID, yeah, bro. Like I get it with COVID. Like, trust me, I was in nursing school. You know, I once thought I was gonna be in the medical profession for the rest of my life. Watching out for illness is important, but bro, come on, bro, you're gonna have people starve over a flu.
Yeah. No,
I
exactly.
I don't know,
We
and we wasted a lot of food during COVID.
Yeah. I worked at an elementary school last semester. So between January and June, I was working at an elementary school out in the country, and so we had a similar issue where if they, they can claim the food, it wasn't like COVID issue where, like if they didn't take their food then they couldn't have it kind of thing, but there was so much food just getting left over that wasn't being eaten, like fully, like, packaged food that wasn't being opened. And so we, the district forces us to throw that food out. We can't save it for the next day. We can't save it for, like, we had kids that would come after and ask for food, and like, we might sneak them a burrito every once in a while, but like we weren't supposed to do that. Like it was, we could have gotten in a lot of trouble for that kind of stuff. And so we had to be very careful with that. But it was even to the point of like that. So that school had a very small farm on it. They were trying to get more ag classes developing on that school. And one of my coworkers, a buddy of mine who was a custodian there, he had the idea of us buying some livestock, getting like some pigs or something like that. We could feed the wasted food to the pigs. And I was like, dude, that's a great idea. You should go tell the principal that, because our principal was our superintendent. We were our own district in that school because it was a country school. And yeah, it's wild. I went to that school growing up and it has not changed even a little bit, besides them adding the farm. But so we did not end up going to him for that with that idea. I told him, I was like, you need to go tell him, and he was like, no, it's okay, you can tell him. I was like, but it's your idea, and he was like, yeah, but they respect you more, they'll listen to you. And I was like, but it's not my idea, I'm not taking credit for your idea. And I was like, let's go in there together, and he was like, no, it's okay. And so we ended up not doing it, but I still think that stuff like that, and I know, like, city schools can't bring a pig in to eat all of their wasted food, but like there needs to be some level of, like, don't just take that stuff to the dump. Like, farmers will feed that stuff to their cows. Cows will eat anything,
Mhm.
mostly. Not anything. They can't eat everything, but they can eat a lot, and pigs can eat a lot. And so it's like, why would we waste all this stuff when we could just bring it to a farm and feed it to the animals? Or like you said, bring it to the homeless people, or bring it to, there's other areas that we could be bringing that's not going.
Damn, I like that, man. Like, bro, one thing I think our kids miss a lot are life skills. And I'll be honest, I never thought I'd see myself as a teacher. Like, I swear, never even thought about it. But like, what I do is I feel like I'm kind of like, because over by you, you're trying to bring about all this like agricultural change in like an agricultural society, right?
Mhm.
Whereas over here, I'm trying to bring technology into the school, like from a technology background, right? Because these kids are technologically illiterate. They are like they simply they know how to swipe left, up, down, press, go back, and turn the thing on and off. Like that's all they know how to do. They don't know how to write emails. They don't know how to send like download a PDF. They don't know that stuff. Trust me, I get they all the time. I always get questions. How do I send this to you? All right, file, download, save as. Like,
Yeah.
bro, you never learned this, and they don't even like teach that stuff anymore. I don't know why. I think they just assume they have the knowledge. It's like assuming that a kid growing up in a rural area just knows how to farm. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's like when it's a part of your culture, like they have the technology, they just don't know how to effectively use it. I'm trying to actually start an esports program. I started like a video game club. It was like the largest in the school's history with like the largest amount of kids.
That's
So
cool.
like there's an interest, and I want to do a technological history class next year. I would like to do that.
That'd
That
be
would be
cool.
cool. That would be sick.
Yeah, I
But
like that.
one can dream. I'm having a hard time because I'm trying to get the school to use Discord for our esports program that I want to start. But I'm getting a lot of pushback. Oh, you can't moderate it. It's the internet. Wow, the internet. It's like I said, it's all about proper education, proper usage, and teaching people to be responsible when
Yeah.
you doing this stuff. And unfortunately, no one in this culture that I live in over here has that foresight or knowledge of. I'm trying to bring that. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's kind of ironic. You mentioned that they are technologically illiterate. The focus of my whole thing here is agricultural, illiteracy. And
Mhm.
actually, you mentioned that you have a master's degree. I'm getting my master's right now, and my research is in agricultural literacy and how to not how to bring it to schools, because there's been a ton of research in that area, but how to bring it to adults who missed out on that in school.
I like
But
that.
I can go into a ton of depth about that. But to the point of you said that a lot of these kids, since they grew up in a technological age, are expected to already know these things.
Mhm.
In my area, the middle school or the elementary school that I was working at, literally right across the street, one direction is a cornfield, the other direction is a pistachio field, right behind them is a farm, and down the street is a dairy. And those kids come from farm worker families and still do not know that their food does not come from a grocery store. Technological
Uh,
literacy is definitely an issue, but agricultural literacy is something that you could see it and still miss it,
yeah, dude, it just
And
goes
so,
to show. It really, honestly, just goes to show just like how ignorant like our this generation or this current social, you know, group of people currently are. It's just like, bro, with the best access to like food, healthcare, health things like entertainment,
yeah.
literally everything, and people are still like ignorant to like just paying attention to their surroundings, or like people don't know. People think like I don't. I was thinking about this. I'm like, why is our government talking about like electric cars, electric bullshit, this and that? Meanwhile, we're not changing our agricultural practices at all, bro. Dude,
Nope.
animal agriculture contributes to more methane emissions than fracking,
Yeah. I will
like
say,
significantly, drastically.
yeah, I will say in that front, and if we're transitioning over to like the technology side of
Oh, I'm
things
sorry.
again, no, you're good. I'm all for it. I was actually going to do the same thing. In terms of the methane emissions of animal agriculture, we have made some efforts to fix that. It's very difficult to fix, but we have made some efforts
I
to fix
believe
it.
it.
But a couple of the methods that we're working on right now, especially on dairies, because dairies are kind of the biggest, they're considered to be one of the larger contributors to that, is
Mhm.
that on dairies we have something called a methane digester. I'm not sure if you've come across this in your.
No, I haven't actually yet. No.
Okay, so a methane digester, they came out. I want to say the first time I saw them was probably 15 years ago or so. They're somewhat, relatively new technology, and basically they're this giant pit, and so and I can explain the whole process. It's a very complicated process, but essentially the pit can capture methane from the waste that the animals produce, and then it can use that methane as a renewable energy source to power the farm. Or it can give it back to the energy credits of that area. It gives it back to the grid, and then the farmer gets paid for the energy that they capture. So not only does
Okay,
it lower
that's
the
cool.
emissions, but it uses it as renewable energy. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's the only problem with that is there was a government incentive to build those things, and they're extremely expensive, and the payoff for them is not great right now. And so a lot of dairymen are like, I don't know if I want to. And
They should just be mandated to do it, or the government should provide some type of, bro, like
no,
get
I
those shits, get them in the dairies. Let's go.
yeah. So there was government incentives, but then they took those incentives away, and so now it's not as highly, if there's no payoff for the farmer, then they don't see a reason to do it as much. And it's not that they hate the environment, but it's like if that's
They
going to
gotta.
cost so much money for me to produce or for me to build that it's not even going to pay off that well, then I
It's
don't
not
see a
adding. Yeah, it's
reason
not
to
adding
do.
to any
Yeah.
profits. It's like I understand that, man. Like I listen. My heart goes out to every farmer out there, bro. Like that is some tough shit. Good
Yeah.
for them. Like
Yeah.
honestly, like they are. Those are the essential workers. Those are those are the essential workers. All right.
Yeah.
Um.
And so sorry, I
Good.
didn't mean to cut you off, but in a similar front, and this is happening on I think most livestock species, but especially in the dairy industry, they're actually using some genetic technology. And I'm not talking like GMOs; I'm talking like selective breeding. But they are finding ways to breed animals to produce less methane.
Less methane.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So we're doing
Dude,
all we can, but we're just not quite there yet.
all right. So in terms of like technology advancement, agriculture. So what about? So I'm assuming you've definitely. I mean, you've definitely heard of this. I'm not even gonna assume. Like not cloning, but like just like lab grown meat. I know there's
Yeah.
in recent years there's been like by I mean like 2 or 3 years. Like this is a newer idea that people are being introduced to. But the thing is, it's like kind of scary. Like I think a lot of people, at least the public reactions that I've seen or at least studied, seem to be a little bit more worrisome as opposed to like kind of welcoming it, like, yo, let me get some of that science burger, bro.
Yeah.
People are terrified, and I think people do have a right to be. It's kind of very same with like the vaccine and stuff. In
Mhm.
retrospect, I thought about it. I'm like, damn, if I didn't have to get the vaccine, I probably maybe just wouldn't have, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. But because it's like it was the fastest produced vaccine ever in human history. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy. But I'm not going to get into like that whole thing. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, trust me. I'm not an anti-science person, but
Yeah.
I am pro skepticism. I think people should be skeptical of things. So lab-grown meat, like, what is it? Does it work? Is there more progress that's being like developed in that field right now? Have you tried any like actually lab-grown meat? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so and this is one I get asked quite a bit, just because it's like you mentioned, it's such a weird like area. I haven't tried it. I actually don't know if any of it's on the market yet. It might be. I haven't been made aware if it is. I remember when it first came out though. It was 2016 or 17, I believe, is the first time I heard of it, and it was very, very early in development, and I was like, "There's no way that's ever going to be a thing," and it ended up becoming a thing. I was wrong. I'm not going to say that it doesn't work, because they can produce the product. The problem is, and I know that within the next few, at least a decade, but it might even be sooner than that, that the technology will advance enough to be able to match what it needs to. But right now, they can't produce nearly enough to make up for basically the amount of input to produce like one steak is not nearly feasible to produce enough to feed a population. Like it's by no means going to replace conventional meat production by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that it could be a potential supplement, or at least like a nice like complement to the industry going forward. I am
Okay.
very like I'll tell you right now, I have no reason to be, but I'm very skeptical of the technology, mostly because I fear of what it might do to the industry, just because I think it might hurt some of the production of the farmers. But I also don't think it's going to be there anytime soon. Like I see it being at least a decade before we're able to get a commercial lab grown meat product conveniently on the stores. And I say conveniently as though it's not going to cost you $50 for one little
Yeah.
slice of a burger. So I don't know. It's hard to say where it's going to go. I think that it's kind of, the science of it is really cool to me. I'm really interested in the science of it, but because I'm being a scientist, I'm naturally curious about that. But the ag person in me is very hesitant to trust it, and very hesitant to
Fair.
trust what it could do to the industry long term, if it does get to the level of production that it would need to be able to be competitive.
Mhm. That's
So
the problem today too with a lot of different fields. I feel same thing with technology. I feel like people just kind of dive head in first to pretty much everything. Like, oh yeah, let's just do this. And then 5 years later, everyone's like, yo, that was like the worst thing we could have done.
it's like
Uh
Jurassic Park. They did it because they could.
yeah, it's literally that's what it is. And then everyone like looks back 5 years later and they regret it, like, bro, we really started all this. It's just literally same thing with technology, with now with AI, facial recognition, and like kind of like all this stuff, and like basically like surveillance issues and kind of all that stuff. People just give up so much they don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, like that woman who requested her data, like I said, you can request your data from any website, or like a Facebook or Instagram. You can actually request all your personal file. Essentially, just do that. They have to legally send it to you, and you'd be very surprised what they see and catch and hear you do, and this and crazy.
Wow.
I tell my
Yeah.
kids all the time. I tell them they don't listen to me.
Yeah. No, and that's like digital security, and like your privacy on the internet is a very contentious topic in all areas. That's something that actually has been a big area of concern in the ag tech sphere as well, because we're seeing a lot of, like you mentioned, that you did a lot of research on like artificial intelligence usage in agriculture, and
Mhm.
I keep saying artificial intelligence as opposed to AI, because AI means something else in agriculture, and so I'm trying to distinguish.
Okay.
But
I'll be clear with the artificial intelligence over. I don't know what the other AI is.
no, you're good. Our AI in agriculture typically refers to artificial insemination, and so like breeding,
It's definitely a different, yeah, definitely a different
which is why I tend
approach.
to, yeah. You can say AI, that's fine. I just, whenever I say AI, I like to specify which one I'm talking about, because I could talk to a dairyman and say AI, and they think I'm talking about breeding cows, and you talk to a technologist and they know I'm talking about artificial intelligence. So it just depends. Um, Side note, anyways, but yeah. So the presence of AI in agriculture has caused some of those same concerns. And farmers are the most skeptical people you ever meet. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm saying that as they don't like to take risks, because their entire life is taking risks. And so they don't want to take unnecessary risks for the purposes of convenience. Some are very willing to take those risks. It just depends on the kind of farmer you are. Not every farmer is the
Mhm.
same. But I know a lot that are very hesitant to trust that new AI technology, just because they don't know what it's going to do with their information. And farmers are very protective of their information because they're very competitive. And there's a lot of reasons why. But yeah, so I know of a lot of like I could tell you right now of like 10 different products that use AI on the farm and they all track information, but they all have very specific private servers that are specified to that farm and are not like accessible by the public or accessible by a company. They're, internalized by the farm for the sake of protecting that information. Even then the farmers are like, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I trust that. And I don't blame them, but yeah, I know there's like I don't know if you came across Beewise as a company that has an artificially intelligent beehive, which is really cool.
Oh, I haven't come across them. I've come across a few other ones. They're looking. There's an app somewhere in Europe. Some guys developing an app where you can. They're building facial recognition, like AI screenshots of like dogs, and they're trying to use essentially like this, they're doing this in a lot of fields. They're doing this in agriculture, where essentially they have like they set up like feeders and stuff with cameras, so that when the pig or the animal comes to feed, the AI takes thousands of screenshots and it compiles that data and creates like an account of like, okay, this is pig one, right? Pig one looks like this, and you can track them over time and stuff. And with AI, what we could do is since animals like grimace with pain and they, something like my cat, he's laying on the couch right here, right? I don't know if he's in pain or not, but my camera, if there's enough AI imaging of him, I can you can probably compare, or if there's an image that the camera takes and it's like, oh, well, the cat out of 1 million pictures looks like this normally, but in the past couple hundred pictures, he's looking like this. There might be an issue wrong. So they've been doing that to test the happiness of animals like cows and pigs on farms, because better treatment has been, I think studies have shown that better treatment of animals in agriculture led to better quality meat.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like kind of using AI and facial recognition technology for animals, which is I know is a big issue for a lot of like vegans and stuff, because it's like they think morally like we shouldn't be killing animals and this and that. And listen, I like animals. I would never willingly want to kill one, but if I had to survive and feed myself and my family, I would have to kill a pig, So that's just the way I see it. And I respect vegans for their diet of choice, but like the morality definitely is a big question. I wonder, like, I'm sure farmers respect the animals, and that's why I always think back to like indigenous cultures in America, where it's like their thing was like they never over hunted, right? They only use every single bit from every animal they would capture and hunt down. So there was like a lot of respect for animals, and I think a lot of people in what I've been watching recently, these documentaries and stuff, they talk about like that, like humans, our lives are so intertwined with like our environment, like nature and animals, like we, like why is it that we respect a cat and we don't respect a pig, right? So, even though I'd argue like my cat does less than what one pig does, what one pig offers, right?
Yeah.
All my cat does is drain my bank account.
Yeah.
So, right. So
yeah.
I think that's one way people need to kind of like start, just everyone generally, they're just having a better outlook towards like agriculture, but like also like what this technology is doing in this agricultural field. Do farmers like even care about like the happiness of their animals? Like, have you been coming across any information like that? Like, is this like, oh yeah, bro, I just bought a new like AI camera for the pig pen, is that like a thing?
Yeah. I mean, well, I wouldn't say they're buying AI cameras for the pig pens, but farmers definitely care about the happiness of their animals for multiple reasons. The first one is, like you mentioned, happy animals produce happy products. I'm sure you've heard the marketing. I almost said scheme. It's not a scheme. Like the marketing message of
the ploy or whatever it was.
Yeah, the happy cows make happy milk.
Okay.
And so there's actually one of my professors in college, his master's research was in the impacts of stress on meat quality of animals. And they determined that a dart cutter, which is an animal that their meat is so tough that it can't even be eaten. It's considered like toxic to humans. That is only possible through extreme stress and neglect of that animal. Like, not just like they're not getting fed enough, but like they're being abused. They're being like they're in a very dangerous environment. That makes their meat. That's why like wild boar usually doesn't taste very good, because they're very stressed, because they're always on the go and they're hunting, and they're like that is why domesticated animals typically taste a lot better than non-domesticated, just because they don't have that stress factor built into them. That's where the gaminess tends to come from. Part of it is stress, part of it's diet. But
crazy.
Yeah, so the stress levels of animals heavily impacts their quality of product and just their quality of life. If you have a stressed out cow, it's not going to milk as much. It's not going to produce as much milk. The milk is going to be lower quality, and it probably won't live as long. And then you get even less milk. And so
Mhm.
there's the financial purposes for keeping an animal low
So it's
stress.
profitable
Exactly.
to make them happy.
Exactly. So there's that side of it, but there's also the moral obligation that farmers hold to their animals. And I'm going to be the first to say right now that there are some bad apples out there. Not all farmers
Of
are good people,
of course.
which is true in every single industry. But for the most part, most farmers, especially all the ones that I've met, I don't get me wrong, I've met some farmers who are definitely not good people who do not practice the way they should, but they're like one in a billion. And so the most farmers are typically very religious people, very, morally upstanding people, very high, like high members of the community. They're not just like hiding away on their farm. They won't talk to anybody. They're very active and social and liked in the community, and they have a very high, moral compass. And they hold their animals to the same like level of respect as any other member of their family. It's like that cow is not a dog that's one of their children. If a cow dies, it's not just sad because they lost out on money, they lost out on a member of somebody that they cared about.
That's
um
cool.
yeah, and I'm not going to say that like every farmer has a funeral for every cow that dies, because cows die every day, but and to a degree you do get desensitized to the amount of times they die, but it doesn't make you any less sad to it happening. It just means you acknowledge that it happened, and you move on.
Mhm.
um when I was in high school, I made a policy where on the last day of fair, which I'm assuming you've been to county fairs and that sort of thing. At the end of county fair, all the animals get sold and they get taken onto the truck off to the slaughterhouse. Some actually don't go straight to slaughter; they get fed out for about 30 days and then they go to slaughter. Depends on who bought them, but I made a strict rule my first year showing. And keep in mind, this is back when I was still like not really into ag. I cared about my steer, but I wasn't really like I didn't want to do it long term. But I made myself a strict policy of I get to be the one to walk my steer onto that truck because I had to be the one to send him. And the reason why is because I didn't want there to be an argument that I can just raise the animal and then let it go and not have to see it again. Like I had to be the one to say goodbye because I have to hold that over my head that I just told that animal that he's going off to the slaughterhouse. And the reason why that I do that is not because I'm cruel and I want to be the one to tell him, but it's because similarly you were mentioning like the indigenous people's perspective on animals and our relationship with them in nature. I hold that same perspective. I was raised in an animal loving family. We had cats and dogs growing up. My sister trains horses, and she taught me animal behavior from a very young age. I don't know if you're familiar with Temple Grandin at all, but she's an expert in animal behavior. She's an autistic lady, and she's very, very prominent in the agricultural community. She actually designed most of our modern slaughterhouses to be as low stress as possible on the cows and on
Wow.
all the livestock to make them as not only to make them as high quality as possible, but to just make sure that their last few days are as comfortable as possible. Because of her autism, was able to put herself in the shoes of animals and to kind of feel how they feel. And so she knows, when they get stressed out and when they're not going to move and when they're having a hard day. And she made technology that was designed to accommodate that. And so growing up, I've always had that same mentality of, animals are not there for us to just use. There's a mutual respect there. And what I always tell, I have friends that are vegans, and they've fought me on it before, and they think that it's so cruel that I raised animals and then walked them off on the truck and said, "All right, bye, go to the slaughterhouse." And what they don't see is the 3 hours that I spent crying after my steer went off to the slaughterhouse. But it's not crying as though I regret it. It's crying as though I acknowledge that's a part of the system, and it's still hard.
Mhm.
But the moral code that I hold myself to for all animals, not just livestock, is I'll take care of you if you take care of me. We have a mutual relationship here. I'm with every animal that I've ever raised, and especially the livestock that I've raised. It's I'm going to feed you. I'm going to bathe you whenever you need it. I'm going to make sure that you're comfortable. If it's hot outside, I'll have a fan on you. I'll have misters on you. I'll make sure you have a comfortable spot in the shade to lay. I'm going to walk you every day so you don't get too fat for your bones. I'm going to give you the best life that I can possibly give you. And when you get to the point where you can no longer live a comfortable life, I'm going to make sure you don't have to. And I'm going to make sure that you get, put down at a time that is most convenient for your quality of life. And that's how I've always lived, and that's how I was raised. And so in my family and in most farming families, there's this idea of, the animals are not there just for us to exploit, like people tend to think. They're there because we are serving them, and they're going to serve us when the end of their life has come.
Mhm.
So that's kind of in terms of like the technology and stuff. I could see some farmers adopting that for the profitable purposes of trying to maintain low stress levels. But most farmers, they can tell by looking at an animal if it's stressed or not. Like I said, I've been studying animal behavior for most of my life. If I wasn't going to teach agriculture, I would be studying animal behavior professionally, because that's kind of my interest is animal behavior. Like when I was in high school, I got called the cow whisperer quite a bit, because I got to a point where I was so connected with my animals and with cattle in general that I could tell you what they were feeling. If an animal was high strung, or if it was stressed out, or if it was scared, or if it was hungry, or if it was just happy and wanted to play. I had friends of mine that were like, I can't work with my steer today. He's too crazy. And I go in there, it's like, he's not crazy. He's just got a lot of energy today. You have to get him out and walk him for a little bit. And they would, and he would jump around, and he'd freak out, and he would, have fun. But as soon as they got him calmed down, he was a great steer. And they would say, well, how'd you know that? It's like, because if you look at him, you can see he's having a great time. He's not mad. He's not scared. He's not freaking. He's everything about him. Like, you can tell by watching how an animal breathes. You can tell by watching their tail, their ears, their eyes. Everything about an animal is a story. And if you read it correctly, you can tell, okay, this animal's stressed out. I need to be careful how I approach it. Or no, this animal's having a great time, but he might hurt me because he doesn't realize how big he is. So I should probably be careful around him, or
Mhm.
like, that's why I'm always, it's kind of like a weird joke in my family that dogs naturally love me. Like, I've never met a dog that has not liked me before. And so every time I walk up on a dog, people say, oh, don't touch that dog. They're very aggressive. And then I'll, just kind of, stick my hand out, and the dog lays over and lets me pet their belly. And everyone's like, how'd you do that? I don't know. I speak their language, and
Mhm.
but you can only get to that point if you have a respect for your animal. Like, if you know your animal well enough, if you know animals well enough, then you typically can just kind of feel, or you can tell just by watching them, what's going on in their head, and from there you can decide if you need to change something, or if they're happy and they're having a good life. And I try to strive for that.
See, I like that because it gives like a purpose to kind of what you're doing, and you're not just like aimlessly slaughtering animals, and you're not sending them off to like die, right? Like
Yeah.
I like that perspective. It kind of gives a whole different view of the entire field of agriculture from like obviously, listen, I'm a city guy, so it's like it's our lives are two completely different avenues of what we understand. But I think that's really cool because it gives me a perspective into like the behind the scenes of like how do I get the food that I can meal prep and like eat healthy meals and stuff, and like how do I get this stuff right? And it's because someone puts care into like what they do. Like I put like I'm sure you do when you go to teach. Same thing that I do when I go to teach, or I go there because I care. I work there because I care. I don't work there because I'm making $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
I work there because I work very well with the population. The kids, they benefit from the lessons, not just history lessons, just like the life lessons I give and provide, and the insight and the support that I give them.
Yep.
So it's like I'm doing the same thing with kids, but like we just get shunned for killing kids, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little
But
bit frowned upon, but
yeah, so not some of these kids. Some of these kids are there's something. But no,
yeah.
I wanted to actually ask you something. So I actually wanted to say the AI thing plays a
Yes.
role directly into what you were talking about with like the facial
Mm.
recognition for someone like me that isn't an expert with like cow
Body language.
appearances
Yeah.
and body language exactly. Like AI, you'd be able to scan the cow, and then it would suggest like there's an 85% chance that the cow is happy,
Hmm.
or it'll tell you based on the thousands and thousands and if not millions of pictures of this cow or what a cow looks like when they're happy.
Hmm.
This is 80, 85, 95% of the time what a happy cow looks like.
Interesting. I like that.
So yeah, so that's one of the incorporations they're trying to do with AI. It also helps with tracking animals because they made a really good point. It's like, how do you track 50 pigs? Like, bro, I think they all look the same, And I'm sure to someone more experienced, like obviously, you can probably tell them apart. And to avoid tagging them, right? Because tagging, it's like putting an animal through pain, right? Um,
Hmm.
they're trying to use AI facial recognition to avoid having to tag animals,
Hmm.
to
That's
avoid
interesting.
like putting like needles in them and kind of all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. I think that's cool because it's like people are actually so concerned with the welfare of
Yeah.
these animals that they're willing to invest all their time and money and resources into creating technology simply to make their lives an animal's life easier. And I know to a human with like free will and like rationalized thought, right? It seems like why would you do that? But
Yeah.
it the whole our whole ecosystem that we live in, right? Whether it's technology, agriculture, nature, whatever, it all functions together, right? Like this is just the biome in which we live, and we need to be more responsible technology users. We need to be more responsible, just citizens of our society here, and like actually, push for green initiatives and things like that. I think one of my councilmen actually reached out to me. He said he wants to do an AI project. He can get a grant where the kids can do like an environmental cleanup, but they have to use AI to plan and implement research
Huh.
to implement a cleaning strategy for doing something in town to make it like nicer or more environmentally friendly. So I'm like, yeah, that's cool. It's like great because it's teaching them the right way to use AI
Yeah.
to perform research to get insight into an issue, a topic,
Mhm.
and provide some examples and ideas. And then they come together as a class and they say, hey, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. Sounds great. Let's go do this. We'll implement these in town. Awesome. Good job. You
Hmm.
know?
I like
So,
that.
as opposed to just saying, hey, hey, write me an essay on the
Right.
Aztec Empire and then submitting it to me. And then me being someone very well versed in AI, looking at it, being like, wow, this was written by AI. And then I counter searched it and it was produced by AI. I gave him a 0 and he got upset. So,
Oh
good
man.
and bad uses of technology. It's nice
Yeah,
to see kind of like what the positives are in the agricultural field. I'm actually kind of curious, like, do you want to talk about like some of the negatives maybe?
sure.
Or is there something you wanted to like maybe bring up more specifically?
No, I mean, agricultural technology goes in so many different directions nowadays that I can talk on very many different fronts. There's more in like the environmental side of things I could talk on if you're, we were talking about like the climate change issues earlier. I could talk on
Oh
that
yeah,
front.
we can
Um,
tie we can tie it into like how is is the technology actually negatively impacting the environment? How is it impacting the environment? Because I know right now like pretty much it was so interesting to learn like the a huge E. coli outbreak that we had.
mhm.
It literally was from just like dirty farms, like
Yeah,
people not cleaning up the all of the excrement and the excrement getting ran off into the water supply, and then that water supply going to water the plants, and
yep,
then now all of a sudden the biggest carriers of E. coli actually are not. It's not beef. It's like green veggies. Like
yep. Romaine lettuce.
it's absolutely like absurd to like something from the gut of a cow. Like like the science for agriculture is it's so in depth, and you have to like be aware of like all of these issues all at once. And to
Yeah.
me, I'm like, damn, I never thought of that. The honestly, like the most experience I've had with understanding like processed foods was like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, you know?
Hmm.
So and like reading about like how disgusting meat packing factories in Chicago were. And it's like people losing fingers and blood everywhere and like
And the
meat dropping to
rats.
the
Yep.
ever just and then people
I
were eating that food. We've like we said, we've come a long way, but
yeah.
there's still improvements that need to be made because like dude, imagine like an 8-year-old biting into like a cheeseburger and like getting E. coli from the lettuce, like because
Hmm.
farmers just didn't clean the shit up, and the cows were living in their own shit. It's just it's crazy to me actually how in depth agriculture is, and I'm so glad I kind of like got like not only into this podcast, but I also just came across all this stuff, and like I feel like I'm like the biggest like farmer boy now just from how much research I've been doing. I'm like
That's great.
this is a lot, but it's interesting stuff.
Hmm.
It's so what are some of like the negatives like are is the environment like made worse because of like these technological changes because they're mass producing more animals, so obviously it's increasing emissions and stuff like that, but are there downsides to this technology?
There definitely are. I will say on the environmental front, I think that there are more upsides than downsides at the moment. That was not the case for very long. Like that's a very recent thing that we've kind of figured out. And I will say we haven't adopted most of the technology that is beneficial to the environment yet, but it's coming down the pipeline and it exists. It's just not readily available to the farmers. Um, in terms of the negatives of the technology, right now, the biggest negative is just being able to get the stuff. It's very
It's
expensive.
expensive.
It's very difficult. And it's not heavily produced enough to be able to be affordable and accessible to most farmers. So there are some solutions to that I can get into in just a minute. But I think the biggest negatives in terms of technology right now are just that, well, if we're talking farmer to farmer, then there have been a few. A few years back, there was some big legal debates about drone usage in agriculture because of privacy issues. People were flying drones over each other's properties and spying on each other, and that caused a lot of issues. drones were getting shot out of the
Oh,
sky because of issues. And so
wow.
there is the privacy concern that has been a growing concern in the agricultural sphere, is the increased use of technology, and especially of artificially intelligent technology, the increased potential for,
Competition and sabotage and things like that.
competition and sabotage, privacy
Is that like is that a
exploitation.
thing?
Uh,
Is
to a
there like an
degree,
intense level of competition
there's
amongst
an intense
farmers?
level of competition in agriculture. The use of technology for that competition is still, it's not strong, but it's there. I will say that the competition. So agriculture has been a competitive industry for pretty much since the second revolution. Second revolution was, as we mentioned, during the industrial revolution, that was the commercialization of agriculture. People stopped producing foods for their own families and they started producing them for large scale industry and markets. At that point, it became a competitive industry, and since then, it's always been a competitive industry. Um, the level of competition changes all the time because it's ironic. We're all in this together and we all say, hey, we're all farmers. We need to stick together and help each other. And at the same time, we're like, hey, let's all grow the same crops that we can try to make more money than each other then. And it just saturates the market and destroys everything. So farmers, as smart as they are, maybe don't always think through things the way they should, because there are some farmers who get money hungry and they see the dollar sign and ignore everything else and just go for that. I will say that there are some corners that get cut in agriculture at times, typically not with the food safety inspections. That romaine lettuce situation is kind of unusual, and I'd be willing to bet that it is definitely to blame on the farmer part in some capacity, but the processor is also a very common spot in which a lot of the food safety concerns happen.
They honestly are not good. The FDA and stuff, like our conditions that we've set up, like for like food safety, actually are not the best. It's actually surprising. I honestly I trust the farmers more than I trust the government's like inspectors, to be quite
Yeah,
honest with you. Like I think farmers honestly are doing the best that they can. Whereas when you get to these factories, these are like minimum wage workers, literally butchering and slaughtering and grinding animals, and they have no, they get paid $15 and not even in some states, right? They get like
yeah,
10 $10 an hour to throw chickens in a grinder to make chicken nuggets, and then the inspectors, from what I understand, there's only one per facility,
depends on the
and like,
size, but yeah,
and then from the a lot of the research that I've seen, or like testimonies that people have left behind, they say that like these inspectors don't really do anything. They just look at
yeah,
things. They don't really test anything. They just watch. They're like an overseer, and it's
yeah.
like very strange because it's like, shouldn't you be like ensuring the quality, like testing random samples, making sure things are like well kept and cleaned and sterilized, and that's where my big concern is, because food safety is important, man. Like when you're working in a field, like if you're like a nurse or a doctor, right? Like in the medical field, like you're not like you have to have your head on tight. Like you gotta really give it your all, right? Same thing with
Yeah.
food production.
Yeah.
Like you can't just half-ass food.
Yeah. I will say I could be completely making this up, but I've heard that the quality assurance in most processing plants is better than the federal inspection. And so most processing plants are better at ensuring their own quality than they are of the inspector ensuring that quality.
Yes.
Um,
There is an organization actually. Oh damn, do you remember? I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's actually like an organization of like some of the top, like Dole and like
mhm.
all these big fruit and agricultural companies. They actually team together and they have their
Yes.
own kind of like what the rate how the government does like the rating system.
Yeah. Mhm.
Nintendo, because Nintendo, Sega, and they actually wanted to team up at the time, and they wanted to actually create their own rating board. And then the government was like, "No, you can't do that." And then they just came out with E for everyone, 13, like mature,
Yeah.
and it's like, and but they don't enforce that. When I was a kid, actually, like you couldn't buy rated R games. I was like
Oh.
13. I couldn't. They
Huh.
actually enforced that.
Wow.
Nowadays, dude, they just download stuff right on the internet. You know what I mean? There's no
Yeah.
moderation. Like they don't look for the explicit. And even when a parent buys a game, like my mom bought me rated R games. Like I'm like, oh mom, buy me Red Dead Redemption. Okay, here.
Yeah.
Because she's like, she trusted me, but still, like she could see the rated R on it, or M for
Yeah.
mature, and then like, but they don't know what gives it that rating. It's like blood and violence, and then it's like sex and prostitution, and like all this. Like these rating boards are sometimes very ineffective. And usually it's the other way around, where it's the internal is
Yeah.
worse than the government, but it's actually the opposite in agriculture from what I've also like seen in my own research.
Yes. Yeah. And
Crazy.
so that's what I found. I've also, so the United States is considered to have the safest food supply in the world, but not from the, it's, let me see if I remember how this works. The reason that we have so many food safety concerns is because we import a lot of food from countries that do not have the same food safety standards that we do. So the food we export is often much safer than the food we import, from my awareness. I'm not sure what
Okay,
your
I
research
didn't.
has found.
I've a lot of the documentaries I say typically they say things along the lines of like the United States says we have the safest food, but you know X, Y, and Z. I think one of the documentaries actually talked about like how salmonella became like a big issue, and then
Mm,
like salmonella wasn't actually. It's like you can sell chicken with salmonella because it's up to the responsibility of
the
the
consumer to
person to
cook it. Yeah.
remove it, right? Yeah. So and it's like what if every consumer is not that smart? Like, I mean,
Most of them aren't.
and yeah, dude, like for example, like I don't run my stuff under, I don't run my meat underwater.
Right. Yeah. No,
You know how much
it's
dirty bacteria is in the public tap water?
mm-hmm.
You're just
Yeah.
adding germs to your food, and then you're washing that salmonella into the drain
Yeah.
if there is any, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually so unsafe to wash food, certain food.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, so exactly. So there's definitely some food safety concerns in that regard. In terms of technology, I don't think we have a great way of fixing that yet. I think we're still kind of working on that. But like I was mentioning earlier, a lot of those public concerns often come from either abuse or a lack of proper use of technology. Kind of circling back to the question here. I'm trying to think of like other negative uses though. For the most part, technology in agriculture is only utilized if there is a positive benefit to it. If there's a potential for a negative, they try to avoid using it altogether because a lot of farmers are very hesitant to adopt technology in general. As we
Okay.
mentioned earlier, a lot of farmers are very skeptical. And so if the technology does not make sense on paper, they won't even try it in practice. And so there's a lot of push towards getting more technology in agriculture, and it's starting to work. I mentioned earlier that we have some solutions to the price issue, and I went to there's an agricultural technology conference held in October, about an hour actually where my college is at. It's about an hour from my house,
Oh, cool.
and so I went to it last year. It was actually the first year they hosted it last year, and in that conference, it was they had people from all over the world. There were all kinds of different countries coming together to talk about this issue. And during that conference, they talked about a lot of the issues that the technology industry faces, which is, for the most part, a lot of technology used in agriculture is produced outside of agriculture. So it's produced by people in Silicon Valley. They're producing it for other companies. They're producing it for the military, and then it gets repurposed into agriculture. Or as people who do not come from agriculture and they're designing it for a farm, but they don't fully understand how a farm works because they don't come from that background. And so a lot of the movement right now is towards having technology companies having some kind of agricultural consultant to make sure the technology actually is useful on the farm. And then the next issue is the availability and accessibility of that technology. Usually, most of it, if you're running that tech, then you have to have some kind of operator. You have to have a pilot for your drone because you have to have a pilot's license to fly a drone. You can't just have a drone. You have to have, a special mechanic just to work on artificially intelligent or computer operated technology in your tractors. Like John Deere got
That's
in a
true.
bunch of trouble for this recently, and they're still getting in trouble for this because they make tractors that you're not allowed to work on. They have to come work on it because if you work on it, they can sue you because you signed a contract when you rented their tractor because it has technology that they designed, so they get to work on it. Yeah, so they get to charge you
That
a whole bunch of money, and you can't harvest that day because your tractor broke down and they didn't fix it.
crazy. Actually, it's funny
Yeah.
with all this agriculture stuff. My last name is Derr. It's Derr.
Mm.
I kids would call me Tom Deere all the time. Like literally
Uh,
like the like when I was especially when I was in high school, I went to an all boys high school, so like they were like especially ruthless
oh yeah,
and like always like the John Deere logo. I'm
that's
just like
funny.
I'm like oh my god, and they would call me like a redneck and stuff. I'm like bro,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like from like the city. Like I don't know I don't know what you want me to do. It
kids
was
are
just it was
stupid.
fun. Yeah, kids are stupid.
But yeah, so that's, I guess that's an issue I would consider with agricultural technology is a lack of availability, just because a lot of ag tech companies,
Accessibility too.
yeah, exactly. So like farmers are not allowed to operate the technology. So like there's this big old push to get farmers to learn how to use the technology, but they're not allowed to use it. They have to have an operator on site to use it. So they're having to get their own certifications so they can run their own tractor that they bought. And so it's there's a whole lot of red tape there, but there are movements to fix that. So a lot of ag tech companies are actually partnering with farms right now, and they're allowing them to basically like trial their technology to make sure it works for them before they have to pay for it. And then if they like it, then they can keep it and they pay for it. And if they don't like it, no worries, they don't have to use it. But the nice thing is it's a mutually beneficial relationship because now that farmer gets to see if the tech is right for them, and the tech company gets results with their technology, and they get to market it and say, hey, look, we've already had farmers try this and it works for them. So that way it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot more accessible. The tech companies actually provide trainings for the farmers, that way they're able to operate it on their own and fix it on their own. But like that is one thing I will say. One of the negatives to the technology is there's a big argument right now about the increase of automation and automation in agriculture impacting the job market for like farm workers.
Yeah.
Um, but there is one counter argument to that. We currently have about seven. I always forget if it's million or billion. It's a big difference there, but a very big amount, 7 million or 7 billion jobs in agriculture open every year. And those are not like farmers, those are like farm workers, the people driving the tractor, the people, so it's not like we're replacing jobs. It's like we're creating technology to take up the jobs that we're not able to fill right now. And so like there's been all this concern like, well, the farm workers are going to be unemployed. It's like, well, no, we don't have farm workers to work right now. So we need somebody to pick up that slack, and that somebody may just happen to be a robot. And even if the farm workers do get unemployed, we can train them to run the technology, and they get a new job running the technology instead of doing their old job. So it's not like a complete replacement of jobs. It's a reallocation of resources, and it's a new improvement, or it's a new evolution of jobs, because now people are learning how to use the technology instead of just doing whatever they were doing before. It's the same argument as to when they first produced the tractor. People were saying, well, you're going to replace all these jobs because now people aren't going to be able to push the plow. It's like, well, no, now they can drive the tractor. So it's the job is still there, it's just changed now. And so I understand the arguments of technology taking away jobs, but really it opens up the opportunity for more jobs. It just requires a higher level of understanding for those jobs.
Yeah, and that becomes a little bit of a problem because I'm even thinking about that just in general. Because think about like a world like totally ran by technology. Like imagine like the metaverse becoming a thing where technology is integrated normally into your everyday life. Now, and then what happens if there's a glitch or something goes wrong with yours? And it's like you can't fix it. Like you're not
Mm-hmm.
taught to fix it, and you're not taught to wire chips. And like if you don't have that, I have a feeling like I'm thinking about it now, honestly, just kind of peeked into my head, but like we're going to have a problem in like 10, 15, 20 years when there's going to be so much technology in your house, in your life that is like you're dependent on, right? And you're not going to be able to fix it. And then like really the only people that can are very extremely specialized people, like for
Yep.
particular chips and circuits and all this. Now they have like quantum computing too. They're working on like literally quantum computers.
It's
It's
insane.
like yeah, it's absolutely insane. I don't know. Just imagine quantum mechanics, but in a computer. It's just like, bro, what?
Ugh.
But
My head already hurts.
I know. But it's crazy to see kind of like people. I don't know, because I feel like with agriculture, like I was looking up some stats, and 1.3% of people work on farm employment jobs
Yes.
out of our entire population, whereas 21.10 million people, full and part time, are related to agricultural and food sectors, which is
Mm.
10% of the U.S. population. So it's like there's a lot of people involved in food, but like I feel like on farm work, I mean, I guess it's just naturally decreased, which makes sense because like there is more technology and like automation and stuff like that, and you just need less people involved, less
Yeah.
hands in the pot, as opposed to hiring migrant workers or what I mean, like all these different types of. Well, that's actually another issue, dude. That's
It
another
is.
historical issue I did a lot of studying on, is like the exploitation of like Latin American
Mm-hmm.
workers in the United States with like don't even for the banana republics, like
Oh yeah.
oh I can't believe I didn't even think of that, like until
Yeah.
like right now. Like we could have talked about how agriculture was used to like as a shroud to take over other countries, like.
Yeah. All right. Now, unfortunately, I have to cut the conversation there because, like I said, this is just a doozy of an episode. There's so much going on here. So we're going to continue this in 2 weeks with the next iteration of our conversation with Thomas. So make sure you're looking forward to that. And I appreciate Thomas for being a part of this episode. I'll make sure all of his links and everything are down in the description so you can go check out his stuff. But it was a great episode so far. We still have another half to go, and there's a lot of conversation and a lot of ideas getting thrown around here. So I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. Hope you guys are learning a thing or two about agriculture and history and the relationship that it all plays here, and how important it is to be aware of what's going on with your food. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys for this week. So once again, make sure you're checking out the links down in the description below. Make sure you're commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing, following, doing all the things as usual, sharing with not just your online family, but your offline ones as well. And once again, the Patreon is down there if you'd like to support us. As always, appreciated, but never mandatory. And that's all I have for you guys this week. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope to catch you all next time. And don't forget, you ate today. Thank a farmer.